Yes.
All right, so we're live now, and I'd like to introduce Brianna. She's a clinical nutritionist and global educator, not just a local educator, but a global educator. And I can hardly wait to hear what you have to say. The products that your company formulates are so clean and so well put together and so clinically effective. And it's just a pleasure. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and it's all yours.
Great. Thank you so much. I am so excited. Hello to everybody who's watching live and to those who are going to be watching this later. We're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, which is stress, because I think it's something we have all experienced. Obviously, I have coined the term recovering super spaz, which I think a lot of people on the East Coast understand. So we'll get into that a little bit. And we'll talk about some herbs and botanicals and even some formulas that we have that can be helpful for that, and understanding that stress is not totally a bad thing. It's something we have to learn to coexist with. And like most anything in health, the dose makes the poison. So we're going to be talking about a little bit about Stress 101. We'll touch on adrenal gland health, emotional well-being and what that means, especially in this world that we've been living in for the past year, which has been wild to say the least. We'll get into adaptogens and nervines in particular, and then some other herbal support. And so there's been a really famous quote that basically just says, it's not the stress that kills us, it's our reaction to it. Again, because stress is something that, whether you live the most amazing life or, you have a life that maybe you wish you were dealt a different, deck of cards, life is a series of problems that we just get better at solving, right? So stress is going to always be something we deal with, and your body kind of responds the same. And so I like to kind of take a step back and define what stress actually is, or in health in general. I think it's really important to have kind of a macro view of what some of these terms mean, because we use them so, interchangeably, and I think so casually so sometimes. So per the Merriam-Webster dictionary, stress basically is a force that is exerted when one body or body part or any of these kinds of things can be affected. It could be a physical stress, a chemical stress, an emotional factor, right? And so this is basically a response when our body is kind of out of balance. And we know that a stress response is not necessarily always from a bad situation. We can actually experience good stress as well, known as eustress, right? And so we hear a lot about distress, right? So emotional stress, and, we were in a global pandemic, and my boyfriend, just broke up with me. I got fired from a job. I got in a fight with my friend, right? But eustress are good stressors. So things like, working out, getting married, having a baby, moving, getting promoted. And so we want to have both of them, right? And our body, like I said, kind of responds the same. And so stress is really just any response to a perception. So our perception of stress, it plays a really big role in kind of how our body responds accordingly. And so what I kind of tell people, the analogy is like, stress is stress, right? So like, if I was a mom and I had kids and there was a burning building in the back, if I'm acting really calm and cool and collected, the kids are probably going to follow suit, right? But if I'm acting chaotic and freaking out, the kids are probably going to freak out. And this is kind of what happens in the body as well, because we know that the stress cascade starts with our hypothalamus. So a lot of this does start in the brain, but the stress response is the same regardless, whether it's a real stress, whether it's a perceived stress, whether we start going down this like mental, emotional turmoil, a shame spiral. We can also have chemical, biochemical stresses, alcohol, over-the-counter medications, physical trauma, mental, emotional. So stress is kind of stress to the body. So it's basically any influence that can cause malfunction or dysfunction in the body. And a lot of the times it's expressed differently in the body depending on who you are, what your genetic predisposition is, what kind of your stress bucket is, which we'll talk about in a second. But I like to remind people that stress is a subjective, so that means self, right? Is a subjective response to an objective phenomenon. It's your body's non-specific response to internal, external, all these different factors. And so what's really stressful to me might be very calming to somebody. So a lot of people talk about like, you should do yoga and you should meditate. That's really great for stress. Someone like me, the idea of going and taking a yoga class, that stresses me out. I don't find that stressful. I don't find that relaxing. I find that more stressful, right? So stress is subjective. And so what I like to tell people is that we should really assess what's going on with our stress bucket. And you got to ask yourself, how full is my stress bucket? So if we look at this picture here, there's all these different things that can fill up our bucket. Some things we can control, some things we cannot control. So lack of sleep, life happens, you had a bad day, poor diet, job, finances, right? And when our bucket starts to overflow, this is when symptoms arise. So for some people, it might be expressed as anxiety, depression. For some people, it might be expressed as weight gain. For some people, it might be expressed as crazy cravings for carbohydrates and sugar, right? So you have to kind of ask yourself, why is my bucket overflowing, and where in this bucket can I control certain things, and where can I start to let a little of this out? And I always tell people, like, you don't wait until your boat is sinking to have a life vest, right? So just like you do not wait until you are stressing out or very deep in a rabbit hole, you've dug yourself 6 feet deep to say, ooh, I need to have an anti-stress protocol now. We want to start thinking about that ahead of time, right? So if you find yourself in a hole, the first thing you do is stop digging, right? So that is kind of step one, taking a step back and assessing, like, what's going on with my stress bucket. Next, of course, we always want to take treating the root and the branch, right? So I think everybody who's listening on this webinar understands the idea of treating the root imbalances in the body, because again, the root many times is some form of imbalance. And so, if we're only treating the branches, which many times are the symptoms, so maybe you just feel like you quite literally feel stressed out and you maybe get a tension headache, so you take Tylenol. Well, that's fine and it's going to work short term, but what's causing that? Is there some underlying issues? Are there nutrient deficiencies, right? So we have to treat both. And again, the underlying cause of what's going on, so that we don't have more symptoms pop up, or we don't have more of that overflow, or maybe an emotional outburst or a nervous breakdown or whatever it can happen. So this is a question I would suggest all of you ask yourself, maybe throughout this webinar, maybe after the webinar, because again, with anything in health and anything in life, it's a super individualized approach, right? So biochemical individuality, what works for me is not going to work for you. What worked for me 5 years ago may not even work for me now. So what kind of stressor are you? You have to understand how you individually respond to stress and how you deal with stress when you're picking a protocol. You meet some people who are just cool as a cucumber. They never get affected. They don't stress out. Nothing bothers them. Maybe they don't need something that's going to sedate them, or maybe that's not going to act as a hypnotic on the central nervous system. Or you meet somebody who's like super type A and they already run on adrenaline. And when they get stressed out, they get super sick because that was like one more thing in their stress bucket, right? And so for them, when their stress is expressed in their body, their immune system breaks down. So maybe they need to take more of an adaptogen approach and take things like Eleuthero. So it is really important to understand how you respond, how your body physiologically responds, and how you deal with it. And what I always like to remind people as well is don't stress about stress, right? Like if you're doing all these things that are supposed to be getting you one step closer to being healthy, or supposed to make you feel better, or again, something like yoga, for example, and that stresses you out, or you're a mom of 5 and, or a single parent, and you're supposed to get your kids to class, but you're supposed to write a gratitude journal first thing in the morning, and you can't get to it. Like, don't stress about that, right? Because there's been research that talks about reframing stress and how this can actually be beneficial. And so Harvard actually looked at 30,000 participants and found that reframing stress as helpful rather than harmful can improve performance and then actually reverse some of the physiological changes that happen when we're stressed out. Now, again, as an example for stress starting in the brain, right? The hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal, that's kind of how the stress response happens. If I tell you right now to think about, like, you're on a beach, you're relaxing, you're with your best friends, you're having a cocktail, you can kind of like feel relaxed, right? Like you feel your shoulders let down, you kind of can get a smile on your face, right? But if I say to you, imagine you're sitting in traffic on Friday, trying to go to the shore, Jersey Shore traffic on a Friday afternoon, everybody's merging lanes, you can like quite literally get blood red mad, right? So the stress response is very real, whether it's real or perceived, but a lot of that starts with our head. So we do have to play a role in reframing that. And again, stress is not all bad. Inherently, it's there to help us survive. If there is a tiger chasing us, right, and we get more blood glucose to our extremities, our brain is going to remember like, oh, you know what? When there's a tiger behind us, we should like run away, right? So stress is really important because it helps to actually mobilize these stress hormones. So cortisol is the one that kind of gets a lot of press, right? And we know that cortisol has also gotten a bad rap over the years because while cortisol is one of our main stress hormones, we also have other stress hormones as well, like adrenaline and epinephrine, which can then influence things like not only our immune system, but also other neurotransmitters. And so you might notice, again, figuring out what kind of stressor am I, we have something in the body called adaptive physiology. We as humans love to complicate life. When we're stressed out and our body gives us all of these symptoms, we're like, no, I'm going to push through and I'm not going to listen, right? So for some people, when they're really stressed out, they maybe lose their appetite, right? Because from a physiological standpoint, if your body has to run away from a tiger or digest a steak, it's like, I'm probably going to not worry about digesting my food right now. For other people, we know people who are stress eaters, right? Where they want to eat like cake and cookies and sugar because, again, your body's always trying to protect you. That can actually increase serotonin levels, right? So it can make us feel good and make us feel safe. So our body kind of picks and chooses what is important and what is not important. For women, a lot of the times we see disruption in our menstrual cycle because, again, your body says you're really stressed out right now, you have a lot on your plate, this is probably not a great time to bring a baby into the world, right? We also see things like our immune system can be suppressed. We can see weight being fluctuated, again, because your body doesn't care if you look great naked, it cares about keeping you alive. So your body literally sends these signals through symptoms that we don't always listen to. So again, not all stress is created equal. There's actually research that talks about brief bouts of stress, right? So some of these acute stress is actually really important for telling our immune system like, hey, wake up, right? Or it tells our other systems, it acts kind of like a fire drill, if you will, where it's like, hey guys, we got to practice and make sure we have all of our ducks in a row. But if we have this chronic low grade going on all the time stress, like sort of that thorn in the side of your body, and it's just like always just nagging at you, right? That's where we start to see problems. And so, of course, the dose makes the poison, right? And so in 2020 and a little bit into this year as well, this is, I put this picture up as a joke because every 5 seconds it seems like there was a new stress happening. There was a new disaster going on. There was somebody else was fighting. There was, new mandates, and it was really stressful, emotionally stressful. And so a lot of the times people will kind of say like, oh, my adrenal glands are fatigued, right? And that was a really big thing in the health world for a while. And so Mitch Coven, who's the founder and CEO of this company and an herbalist himself, will actually say all the time, like, your adrenal glands aren't fatigued, you as a person are fatigued, right? And so a lot of the times we do, again, have to take a step back and understand that this stress response is this very highly intelligent conversation that's going on between our brain, so our whole hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal gland, but also it's talking to our hormones and it's talking to our immune system, right? And so hormones like a family function and dysfunction together. So this is why, again, when we are feeling stressed out, we can quite literally feel stress everywhere because of things like cortisol and adrenaline and non-epinephrine, right? Again, because our adrenal glands can affect a lot of our other hormones. And so if we have disbalance or dysregulation in the body, we might understand that, again, we're going to have issues with secondary hormones in the body. And we want to think about, do we have immediate stress going on right now, right? Like, oh, I have a deadline at work and I have to get that done. That's okay. That's not going to kill you, right? Or chronic stress. Do I have very low grade immune issues going on? Do I have a gut dysbiosis that's been happening forever? Do I have infections that are overgrowing, right? And so all of this is happening that's going to go have a downstream effect of what's affecting the rest of the body. Again, because the hypothalamus is kind of like the CEO of the body. It's overlooking and scanning all these different messages that are coming from our environment and from our hormones and from the thoughts we think and from the food that we eat and from the medications and supplements that we take, right? And then that goes and talks to the pituitary gland, which is kind of like the project manager in the body, who then says, hey, we got to get our thyroid glands together. We got to get our adrenal glands together. We got to get our ovaries, our gonads, right? And this is where we start to see dysfunction happen. Just like if an employee didn't have any vacation days ever, right? Because the CEO is just like not a great person, this happens in the body too. If we don't actually show some love to the adrenals and the thyroid and these other supporting hormones and organs, then the body's going to kind of revolt and be like, you're not listening to me and I really need you to. And so this is where adrenal dysregulation happens. And again, what's interesting is that it can actually take 20 to 30 minutes to basically switch from sympathetic state, so that's that fight or flight mode, to our parasympathetic state. So that's when we can actually like calm down and like relax. So that could take about 20 to 30 minutes. So sometimes we're not always thinking clearly. We have more of a stress cascade happening, right? And then it can take about an hour or two to have all of these stress hormones completely cleared from the bloodstream, which again, this is important to understand what kind of stressor am I? Because for some people that might be heightened already because maybe you have liver enzymes that are slower that don't break down some of these stress hormones and they stay circulating in your blood even longer. So you might need a more heavy hitter sort of herbal approach, right? And so this is where we have to think again about this adrenal dysregulation and not calling it something like adrenal fatigue because, you know, per some of these really great studies that have been done, it's actually not a real term, right? So your adrenals aren't fatigued. I want people to remember that. You as a person probably are, and your body is just kind of running on fumes. And so I get it as a practitioner. You probably get it if you've not been feeling well for a while, but we know that stress can have an impact on all of your health. And so yes, it's affecting your adrenal glands, but there's a very good chance that it's secondarily affecting everything else in the body as well. And so if you haven't felt well for a while, I understand that you want to be able to put a label on something, but sometimes we can then have confirmation bias where we get into this feedback loop and say like, I'm identifying with this quote disease or diagnosis, and then we don't really always listen to the symptoms. So again, that's where we take that step back, look at our stress bucket, see what's going on. And so you might be saying to yourself, well, like, how do my adrenal glands get dysfunction in the first place, right? And so again, we do see prolonged chronic stress. And again, that term, that stress word, that's a big umbrella term for mental stress, emotional stress, chemical, environmental. It can mean so many things. Some of them we can control, some of them we cannot control. Poor nutrition. This is a huge one. When we are stressed out, again, because our bodies want us to always be happy and healthy, it will do it at our own expense. So it will run through B vitamins. It will run through vitamin C. It will run through magnesium, right? And so these are some of our core nutrients that when we're stressed out, our body utilizes more of that. So if we're then on top of it eating a really processed food diet and a lot of sugar, that's going to further strip some of those core nutrients. Some people exercise. I'm one of these. That's one of my anti-stress protocols. Over-exercising, while that can be good in small amounts, can also be a stress on the body because it's depleting further nutrients, right? If we have a lot of chronic low-grade inflammation in the body, which can be from bacteria overgrowing, underlying infections, not giving your body rest, lack of sleep, that's a huge one, right? I always tell people sleep is like the best thing that you can do for your health. It's free and it's the most natural thing. And then again, just kind of living an unbalanced life in general. And I think some of us, you know, it's hard to always identify, is it high cortisol? Is it low cortisol? What's going on? Because we know that a lot of these symptoms can kind of intermingle and be the same. And so what I always tell people is like, forget the label and treat the stress, right? You treat the person, not the paper. I have run many adrenal stress tests in my life, and I've done them myself, and the cortisol test and saliva and blood and urine and all of the things. And at the end of the day, you have to listen to your body, and sometimes you have to do less to get more out of your health, right? And so this is why it's important to listen to the symptoms and understand what's going on, and you can kind of prioritize those, but also understand that we have to take a big picture approach and again, treat what is actually triggering this stress. Again, because stress is a subjective response to an objective phenomenon. And so again, when we talk about this idea of adaptive physiology, how we talked about as well, your body kind of redirects normal functions. And it says, again, do not pass go. You don't need to get your period. You don't need your hair to grow long. You don't need your skin to look good. You don't need to lose weight, right? All of these things that are secondary effects of what's going on with stress. And so health is your body's ability to adapt to the environment. The goal here is not to evade stress and to say to yourself, I'm never going to have a bad day again. I'm going to be positive all the time and I'll never experience a stressful moment. That's not realistic and that's not healthy, right? Again, we do want it in small amounts, but we have to be able to adapt and build resilience and be able to, as I like to call it, kind of bounce back, if you will. And so this is when we talk about holistic health, right? Adaptogens is one of these things that can, again, have multiple targets and multiple effects throughout the body, because disease and sickness and illness and dysfunction rarely lives in a vacuum. We know that anything can affect everything. So it's a very highly regulated domino effect, right? Which can be good in the sense that if you've been feeling unwell for a while, it can sometimes be frustrating because you're like, I don't even know what makes me feel good anymore. But when we start to include some of these small incremental changes, one positive thing, removing a stressor that is food related, removing a pro-inflammatory person from your life, including adaptogens, including Nervines, right? Then we start to see the pendulum swing to the other side where we have positive momentum. And so this is where we can start to use some of these different botanicals and herbs and protocols that can help us to kind of cope with stress. And so again, what I like to always tell people too is that there's kind of like two ways I think that we can deal with stress. Again, because the effects of stress are cumulative. One bad day isn't going to undo all the work that you've done on your health journey, right? Just like if you ate one salad after, eating McDonald's for 5 weeks, that one salad's not going to, make you get your health goals. Or just much like we have a pile of laundry that sits in our bedroom, over time it stacks up and it's fine. And then you add one more thing and it kind of tumbles over. And that's when we notice, right? I used to always joke, like I would have a really bad day and I couldn't put my contact in. And then I would start hysterically crying for no reason because my stress bucket was really full and I had done nothing to help let out some of those other layers or the water that we keep filling in. And so when we're dealing with stress, we can carry our load differently. So, right, it's not the load that breaks you down, it's the way you carry it. Or we can reduce the amount of stress. And again, sometimes, let's say your job is super stressful and you don't love that. You can't always change that. But it is important to understand that there are different kinds of stress response. Again, because your body just wants to always get you back to homeostasis. Your body thrives in balance mode. It loves to have balance. And so when we have imbalances that arise, this can manifest differently in different people, which goes back to the idea of what kind of stressor am I? Does it manifest as anxiety for you? Does it manifest as depression? Does it manifest as sleep issues? Do you get headaches? Do you get digestive issues, right? An upset stomach. And so when we're stressing out, our body kind of has like three main modes. It will either get an upregulated stress response. So this is when we go into hyperactive mode and we have fight flight response. This is when we can see things like allergies flare up, right? People will say things like, it's so weird, I was able to eat this my whole life, and now all of a sudden I can't eat XYZ anymore. Well, your stress bucket's a lot more full. So you're having an upregulated, hyperactive excess response in the body. Sometimes our body does the opposite, where it's like, listen, I've been working way too long, way too hard. You've given me no off days. You're not listening to any of the symptoms. I'm going to revolt. I'm going on strike. And this is where we see down regulation happen. So we have hypofunctioning. This is where everything slows down in the body. Maybe your thyroid doesn't work as great. Maybe your body is not producing as much cortisol. Maybe everything else slows down. This is where we see symptoms of depression, right? And then we kind of have that other person who they have a hearty stress response where they're like, I got this. I'm resilient. I'm going to bounce back. I understand it's all relative, right? And so regardless, we have to understand that our central nervous system, our peripheral nervous system, and even now there's research on the enteric nervous system, our gut-brain conversation, all affects on which of these response is going to be elicited by the body. And so we know that there's a lot of secondary effects of stress as well. It's not all about cortisol and it's not all about inflammation. Yes, that is one piece of the conversation, but we also know, again, our sleep can be highly regulated. I don't know about you, but I have most definitely had sleepless nights when I feel stressed out about something. Our mood, I'm not my best self when I'm stressed out. Our appetite, right? And this is again where we can have things like dealing with our central nervous system and our parasympathetic nervous system, which we'll talk about in a minute. But again, because your body is constantly monitoring what's going on internally, externally, and just having conversations to try and get you to listen. And so I like to ask people, like, how's your emotional immune system doing, right? Last year, we talked a lot about immune health, but much like the immunity, right, you have to ask yourself, like, what do I need right now? what kind of stressor am I? Am I not sleeping? Am I more anxious? Am I feeling palpitations? Is my mood affected? Because this is going to affect what kind of protocol that you take. And again, when your body can't maintain this is when we start to have more of these symptoms arise. And so again, emotional well-being and cultivating emotional well-being is very important when we are dealing with stress. Again, because the focus is not to necessarily, like I said, evade these emotions that are, quote, negative, right? Or have the absence of distress, right? It's about having resilience and being able to adjust our attitude, have social support, have an environment that is conducive for getting you closer to your healing journey, right? And so again, this is the idea of, cultivating wellness. And so when people talk about like, I'm never going to have a bad day, I'm never going to have a bad emotion. I love this quote from the book where it says, we're about as effective at stopping an emotion as we are at preventing a sneeze. If you're going to have a bad day, you're going to have a bad day. Sometimes we wake up, it happens, right? That's like if you think you're going to sneeze and you say out loud, like, I'm not going to sneeze right now. It just happens sometimes. So we have to be able to adjust accordingly as we go along. And again, have some of these secondary support systems with adaptogens, with Nervines as well. Again, because we know there's this whole really cool field of research called psychoneuroimmunology, which actually dives into this a bit more, that talks about how our emotions, the way we feel, can physiologically affect how our immune system works. So this is why we need to be able to adjust our mindset sometimes. We need to cultivate emotional well-being and work on our emotional immune system as well. And so this is why you might notice people who are worrywarts or hypochondriacs, right? They can think themselves into sickness. That person might need more of a long-term approach with adaptogens that can secondarily support the immune system, or some botanicals that kind of work more on the T cell and B cell pathway. So things again like eleuthero, things like lemon balm, which we'll talk about towards the end of the seminar. But these again are things that it's really important to think about, because our behavior, our psychology, the thoughts we think, right, the people we're around, energy, vibes, whatever you want to call it, can directly influence the immune system. And the stress response has a really tight relationship with that as well. And this is why, again, we see sometimes after like a really stressful period in your life, your body's resilient for a very long time and things calm down. And then you're like, hey, you're going to get sick right now. You're going to get strep throat. You're going to get high blood pressure, right? Again, because our bodies have just been trying to be in this sort of, let me help survive mode for a while. And I like to tell people, like, listen, I'm the first person to have a litany of pills and tinctures and potions that I take in the morning, right? Adaptogens are one of these kinds of botanicals or one of these sort of protocols that you're going to be in a very long-term committed relationship with, right? There's flings and there's long-term relationships. Adaptogens are a long-term relationship. And going back to the beginning of the talk, if it took you 6, 9, 12 months to dig yourself into a very, very deep hole of being unwell, you better believe it's going to take at least the same amount of time, if not longer, to get yourself out of that hole, right? So we have to understand that we have to be patient with that and give time, and understand that adaptogens in general, they help your body adapt to stress. They actually work on the limbic brain, which is the emotional part of our brain. They work on the HPA axis. So that's our entire stress response, the adrenal glands, what's going on with all of that. They can help to balance out what's going on with our hormones. They're generally considered tonic, which means, again, you're going to be taking them for a very long time, and then can systemically help the entire system, right? So they're kind of like your friend that like knows a little bit about everything. They can give you a pep talk. They'll tell you the best restaurant to go to, right? They just make you feel good. That's what adaptogens do. However, you cannot adaptogen your way out of a poor diet, out of pro-inflammatory people, out of not getting enough sleep, right? So I tell people adaptogens are like the icing on the cake of your healthy life. So icing is great, but it can't be the only thing. So again, when it comes to adaptogens, these are things that enhance our state of non-specific resistance to stress. So I call this mama bear mode. If I call my mom crying, she doesn't care what I'm upset about or who did it or whatever. She just wants to fix things for me, right? She wants me to feel better. That's what adaptogens do. They're like, oh my God, Brianna's freaking out. How do I kind of get her to get back to balance and feel better? And so they have this sort of non-specific response. But again, with adaptogens, we have to figure out where we lie on the scale, because we have some more that are a bit more balancing in nature. This is where we see a lot of the things like mushrooms. So things like, reishi and chaga, right? We also see some of our more classic adaptogens like, ashwagandha and holy basil. But then if we kind of go up the scale, we have some more that are sedative in nature. So that very type A super spaz, go, go, go. I hit hard. I run on adrenaline. You might need to really calm down. You might need things that are a bit more heavy hitters like California poppy and valerian, right? Even things like skullcap, passion flower. And then you have some that are a bit more stimulating. Again, if you're that person who your stress response is hypo and you're just very deficient in general, you might need things like rhodiola and ginseng and even eleuthero, which can be a little bit more stimulating in nature. So you have to understand where you fall on that scale. Now, when we talk about nervines, this is one of my favorite categories because nervines are a class of botanicals that specifically support our nervous system. So again, when we think about our nervous system, we have our central nervous system, right? Our brain and our spinal cord. We have our peripheral nervous system. So this is what controls whether we go into fight or flight mode, so we're freaking out, or if we're going to be in rest and digest mode, right? Or we're going to be chill. And then we have, again, our enteric nervous system, so the gut-brain action. So nervines are really great for when if you've ever said to yourself, like, I quite literally feel like I'm going to have a nervous breakdown. Or you say things like, this person is getting on my nerves, right? Because again, our body is just secondarily responding to what's going on in the brain. And so when we talk about nervines as well, these are also kind of divided into different classes. We have some that are a bit more relaxing, some that can be a bit more stimulating, and then some that even work more on the peripheral nervous system that can deal with muscle tension, right? So some people, when they're stressed out, if you ever gotten a massage, they're like, ooh, you hold a lot of your stress up here, right? Or you get really, really tense, right? So you might need something like a passion flower. So in this group, right, and we're going to talk about some of these a little bit more in depth, but skullcap, kava, lemon balm, chamomile, California poppy, passion flower. These are some really classic nervines, which can kind of, again, just kind of broad spectrum work on the nervous system. Then again, we have that person who maybe when they are stressed out, they maybe feel it quite literally in their body, like someone is a pain in your side. They maybe get anxiety for that. This is maybe that neuromuscular oriented person, right? And if this is maybe the reason that you can't sleep, this works on the entire central nervous system as more of a sedative. So some of our sleep formulas where we have, like I said, some things like, yes, melatonin, but also some other things like our valerian, which can be something that you want to take before you go to bed. You don't want to necessarily take that during the day. Hops, skullcap, right? We have a turmeric PM formula, which is really great, that has a lot of these really nice botanicals in there as well. And then the turmeric, which can act as a liver cooler, as they would say in Chinese medicine, so reducing heat in the body. And then hops, which we'll talk about. And then we have our hypnotics. So again, this is something that you're going to want to take literally right before you get bed, because they can actually work on inhibiting brain activity, right? So they make you feel drowsy, they make you feel tired, they can work on GABA receptors in the brain, right? So again, this is going to be for that person who, when you're stressed out, like you're just not going to sleep, your brain is racing and you just can't relax. So California poppy is one of my favorites for that. Kava, although kava can be taken during the day, kava over time can really help you relax. Milky oats, hops, and valerian. Valerian in particular is definitely one of those ones that you want to take at nighttime. Don't plan on like being your most energized self when you are taking that. And then again, we have something called parasympathomimetics. So that does not roll off the tongue. I'm not quizzing anybody on that, but this is going to be a really nice, great class of botanicals for actually lowering adrenaline levels. So that type A person who literally just runs on adrenaline, because what this does is it actually turns us on into our parasympathetic mode, that rest and digest, that feed and breed mode. So it decreases that fight or flight mode. So things like lobelia, for example, which we'll talk about, actually can stimulate the vagus nerve to tell us we need to calm down. So we have a couple really amazing formulas like our anxieties and our kava gold that have some of these other botanicals like pulsatilla in there and night blooming cereus, which can work on things like if you've ever been really stressed out and you quite literally feel like heart palpitations, or you feel like, like you feel anxious, right? These things kind of work a little bit quickly. And again, they sort of reduce that adrenaline response. They kind of bring you back into the now and let your body just relax a little bit. So our Kava Gold is really great for that. Our serene mushroom support. And then, like I said, even our anxieties in Kava. And then again, we'll talk a little bit more about these botanicals in a minute, but I like to kind of just show this slide because I think it's really important to understand that over time, our nervous system gradually becomes strained and overloaded and overstimulated, right? So it's a gradual process, which means at any time you can interject and even use a tool like this to kind of say, okay, what actions can I take? What are some supportive resources that I have? And what's going on? Is it more of a physical stress? Is it an emotional one? Is it a social thing going on? And so thinking about some actions I can take, creating your anti-stress protocol, figuring out ways to empty that bucket before it's too late, right? You don't want to, again, wait until your ship is drowning to say, ooh, I could really use a life vest right now. So this is where lifestyle factors are going to be important. I always joke, I say there's really healing benefits of calling your mom and crying. You could do walking meditation, right? It doesn't have to be a 6-week health retreat with a guru and whatever. Anti-stress protocols are individual, much like stress is individual, right? So you have to figure out what works for you. And I always encourage people to make a list of about 10 things, because sometimes what usually works for you, like let's say loud music or the gym, that's always great. Maybe you're having a particularly difficult day and that doesn't work. You need to pick something else. So, think about that, and while you're working on that, and then you can layer in again some things like herbs and adaptogens again. And we want to think about not only what is this herb for. We don't want to always go down that path for too long, because that gets us into that allopathic mode, right? I have a headache, so I'll take Tylenol. But we want to also think about, what does this herb do physiologically to the body, and what system is it working on? Is it helping my adrenal glands? Is it helping my cardiovascular system? Is it working on the brain, right? And so this is where we can kind of start to break down, like, what do I need? Do I need something right now? Do I need something long-term because of how I am as a person and how I respond? Some of my genetic chinks in my armor, right? Things that I am allowing to stay in my life that no longer serve me, right? And so this is where we can kind of develop some of those individual protocols over time. Again, thinking about things that are lowering adrenaline. Maybe we need something that is more hormone forward. So that's where we're going to see a lot of these adaptogens that work on hormone regulation, our adrenal glands. Or again, maybe we're that person who just feels a lot of that nervous energy. Maybe we need some more of those nervines. So I like to start with kava root, because this is one of my absolute favorite botanicals, and it has such a great history. It just works on so many different ways in the body, and I love it because it's been around for so long. It's a ritual, actually, in certain cultures, right? And so it's been used throughout the Pacific Islands. It used to be drank before ceremonies. They have war kava and wedding kava, right? They would drink it before political meetings. So it's used as a medicine, and it's used as a ritual. And so it's this really amazing botanical that can support not only calming the mind, but also calming the body. It's very, very good for emotional stress. So when you're in a lot of emotional, personal turmoil, it can relax you without dulling the senses, which means you could take it during the day, which is really nice, right? And so there's actually, again, found that kava can bind to some of these GABA receptors, so it can help us to feel kind of calm, and it can work on some of our dopamine and serotonin levels. So again, if you're that person, when you're stressed out, your mood is affected. It's really cool because kava lactones, which are one of these active compounds that are found in the roots of kava, they can actually inhibit MAO enzymes. So MAO enzymes are this family of enzymes that basically break down neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. So they can work in the sense that they can actually keep these levels of dopamine and serotonin in between our synapses in our brain. So again, very good for calming the mind down. Particularly if you're that emotional person, it can work on the emotional part of the brain, right? It can elevate the mood, and really, again, for that anxiety forward person. So I know there was a lot of bad press about kava a few years ago, and we do like to address that because there was actually an individual toxicologist that was hired to look into adverse reports with kava, because you might see that on your bottle sometime. And what they found was that the people who had adverse responses to kava had elevated liver enzymes from other over-the-counter medications and alcohol. And they also found that the people who had adverse reactions were using a patented version of a kava root that had extremely high concentrations of kava lactones. So if you're taking kava at the normal, kind of recommended dose, right? So here, some of our kava, we have a liquid that's 500 milligrams per 30 drops, right? If you're taking that every night and you have some other checks and balances of your over-the-counter medications, drugs, alcohol, all that in check, long-term, it should be fine. But of course, we always remind people to check with your doctor and make sure that you understand that. But again, it's not going to make you sleepy. It doesn't necessarily sedate you, but it does kind of help you bring you back into the state of how you should be and kind of make you feel a little bit like you're lifting that mental fog. So I love kava when I kind of need to just like take the edge off. I sort of joke and say it's like, when you're about 1.5 glasses of wine in. People actually drink kava as a drink. We have a kava cocktail recipe that's really popular that Mitch made many moons ago. Lobelia is also a very nice botanical. So fresh lobelia is what we use because fresh lobelia is important. If you're using the dried version of it, it can be used as a emetic, meaning that it can make you throw up in large doses. And that's how it was actually used back by some herbalists many, many moons ago. The fresh lobelia works in the sense that it can actually help to stimulate the 10th cranial nerve or our vagus nerve, which again, that puts us into parasympathetic mode. So it helps to relax things. It can actually open up the lung cavity, right? So the thoracic cavity. So you might see it in some respiratory formulas that we have. When I had bronchitis last year, I was taking lobelia to help me breathe deeper. But also think about somebody, when you get stressed out, you start to breathe really shallow. You're not breathing deep from the diaphragm. You're getting shallow breaths from the lung. So lobelia can help you kind of relax, right? And so it's really good, again, working through the abdomen and through the brainstem. And it can be really indicated for those people for when you're trying to sleep and you feel anxious. Lobelia can kind of just take the edge off because it can decrease those adrenaline levels while not necessarily sedating cognitive function, meaning that you could take this during the day as well. And again, it's also an expectorant. So it can help expel mucus if, again, that's maybe one of the ways you're taking it. But in this sense, for the sake of this lecture, I'm talking about it in support of the parasympathetic nervous system. I like to also note that when we're in parasympathetic mode, this means we can also be secreting more digestive enzymes, right? So if you're having issues with bowel movements and digestion, something like lobelia can be helpful for that as well. It's very bitter in nature, so is kava. They both don't taste amazing by themselves, but that's actually how they therapeutically work as well, by sending some of these signals to the hypothalamus. Lemon balm is my mom's absolute favorite botanical. I love it as well. This is really, really great for people who maybe they get an upset stomach when they're stressed out. It's really nice for calming the mind down mentally. If you have a lot of emotional turmoil, it can just kind of help you unwind, right? So it's calming. It can be used for people who maybe have trouble going to sleep. Maybe they have some restlessness and irritability. So it's very gentle. It's not going to be as aggressive as something like valerian or hops, right? So it's not going to be super sedative in nature, but it is going to be nice to calm things down. It's said to uplift the spirit. It's actually known as the gladdening herb. And story goes that they used to plant lemon balm around beekeepers and around some of the beehives as well to encourage nesting. So energetically, lemon balm is cooling and drying, which is important when we talk about herbal energetics. Think about a computer that has 90,000 tabs open. It gets really, really hot, right? And everything starts to slow down. We would call this inflammation in Western medicine, right? So when we think about the energetics of herbs, things like lemon balm, it's a part of the mint family. Think about a hot summer day. You want to have some like peppermint tea or something that's cooling. Lemon balm can be cooling as well. And what's really nice about lemon balm is that Again, it has a lot of these antiviral compounds, right? So it can be for that person who, when you get sick as well, when you're stressed out, lemon balm can be good for that long-term immune support. Again, also if you get an upset stomach, lemon balm can be really nice for that. It's cooling. It can kind of, like I said, just be relaxing and just sort of help you unwind. And over time, it can actually help to repair the nervous system. So lemon balm, a little bit more mild than something like a hops or a valerian. Passion flower as well. This is very good. What I love about nature is that sometimes you look at these botanicals and they kind of look like what they do. If you look at passion flower, it's this really beautiful like purple plant and it's got these like wound up tendrils. So very good for that person who's super like wound up, right? You are an overthinker. You're very much so in your head, very type A, right? So passion flower over time can slowly strengthen the nervous system, especially if you express your stress forwardness by being very exhausted, right? You're like emotionally and mentally drained, right? So what's cool about passion flower as well, that it actually works on a part of the brain, so the medulla oblongata, which oversees sleep. So very good for helping us to relax. If our brain is kind of like overstimulated and worried, passion flower before bedtime can be really, really nice. It can help us unwind if you're that tired but wired person. Again, also very good for the muscle system. So if you have muscle pain because of stress, can be very good for that. And so good for restlessness, good for mildly elevating the mood. Like I said, muscle pain, and kind of just can help you become a little bit more centered. So I like to take this before bed to relax the mind, to relax the muscles, kind of help you unwind after a really long day. Then we have hops. So I don't love beer. I wish I did, because hops are actually really beneficial. And believe it or not, hops are a cousin of cannabis, right? So known for its sedative properties. And the story goes is that farm workers who used to work in hops fields, they would at the end of the day be very tired because there's a compound in hops called lupulin, which is found on the resin, right? Which would make them so tired by the end of the day. So hops are one of these heavy hitters for sedating and calming things down. Hops as well are also very bitter in nature, so they can help to cool things down, cool the liver down. And what I like to tell people is that hops are really great for a person who's like hopped up on life. They have very intense personalities. They have very strong emotions. They have very strong emotional reactions, right? And for them, that may manifest as exhaustion and worry and insomnia. And again, so this can be really nice for kind of relaxing nervous tension. If we have digestive issues going on with our stress response, again, because there is some of those bitter compounds is in there. Some people will use it for things like menstrual cramping, right? And intestinal cramping in general. But again, if you're also that person before bed who you feel kind of like hot and restless, hops can kind of calm things down. It's cooling and drying in nature. So hops, again, not necessarily one of those things you want to take during the day because it can be a bit more sedative in nature, but definitely, like I said, can help relax things. And then valerian as well. This is one of the more heavy hitters too when we're talking about, like kind of really taking the edge off. So there is a small percent of people, depending on who you talk to, anywhere from 2 to 10%, where valerian can have the opposite effect, especially if you're the kind of person who already has that very hot excess, as they would call it, very pitta personality in Ayurveda. Valerian ashwagandha might actually make you feel the opposite way. But for most people, valerian can be very calming. It can promote sleep, especially for people who tend to wake up during the middle of the night. So valerian is something you're going to want to take before bed. Again, it can also work on the muscles and joints. So if you hold some of that stress in your body, very good for that sort of frayed nerves person. You have a lot of anxiety as well. And it actually comes from the Latin word valere, which means to be strong, right? So over time, it helps you to kind of strengthen the stress response in the body, can work on those GABA receptors as well. So valerian can be kind of calming in nature, can definitely be sedative, and mostly used as a sleep aid typically is how we would see that. And then just a few more, I want to talk about some of the formulas before we get into some questions. We do have a formula called Anxieties, which I absolutely love this formula. When I had LASIK eye surgery, actually, I used this formula because you can't take something like an over-the-counter medication because your eyes have to stay awake, right? And so this doctor came in after my LASIK eye surgery. It's very stressful. You're laying on a table, they tape your eyes open, you got lasers pointing at your eyes. And he was like, listen, I've been doing this for like 20 something years. He's like, I literally have never seen a patient so calm in my entire life. And so I'd like to thank Anxieties for that. So in here, it has some of the botanicals that we've already talked about. So there's the lobelia in here. There's the kava in here, which is really nice. Some other botanicals that are in here, something called pulsatilla, which I love because pulsatilla is really great for that emotionally forward person when they're stressed out. So pulsatilla can be for those who experience really high highs and very low lows. So they're very emotionally sensitive to stress, but it can also sort of lower your heart rate. Same thing with the night blooming cereus, not necessarily from a blood pressure standpoint, but from the standpoint of when you're stressed out, you get those heart palpitations. So it can kind of soothe the mind and the soul, as Mitch would say, if you're going through some of these difficult and emotional times. Again, but it's not going to necessarily, totally knock you out. So the lobelia in here, like I said, the kava, and then the night blooming cereus and the pulsatilla, I really love for sort of that emotional heart, right? We have our physical anatomical heart, and then we have our emotional spiritual heart. And so those can be really nice as well. And then there's a little bit of St. John's in here, which, believe it or not, yes, a lot of people know it for mood support, but can also work for nerve pain. So there's a lot of really cool research on St. John being able to support nerve pain. So Anxieties, one of my favorite formulas. And then we also have kava gold with albizia. So you may or may not have heard of albizia, but this is known as the herb of happiness. And what's really nice is that it can help to lift your mood when you're feeling distressed or when you're feeling anxious. So they say that it can kind of be a little bit calming to the spirit, right? And anchoring the spirit. And they say that the flowers help to lighten it. So depending on how hippy dippy you want to get, like I said, albizia is really cool. Again, known for Shen, which is your sort of heart center in Chinese medicine. And then again, the kava gold, it's really nice for that severe kind of, anxiety issue going on. We have the kava in here. So we standardize it to the 30% kava lactones. And then again, we do the St. John's, we do the passion flower, the albizia bark, and the albizia flowers. So again, very good for that stress forward person. Maybe if you're not sleeping because of that, again, can kind of reduce some of that anxious feeling, can work on some of those neurotransmitters because of the kava. And then lastly, we have a formula also called Relax. So this is going to be more of the heavy hitter as opposed to just the kava gold or the kava gold with albizia or even the Anxieties, because in here we do add the valerian. So there's the valerian in here and there's hops. So if you remember from a few slides ago, those are definitely two of the more heavy hitters. But again, we also add passion flower in here. We add chamomile. Think about some of the sleepy time teas that you've probably drank over the years. There's always chamomile in there, right? And then again, we add the fresh lobelia and the fresh pulsatilla. So again, pulsatilla really nice for that emotionally hypersensitive person. So it can improve that emotional heart. Hops, right, for that hopped up person can kind of calm you down. And again, really good for taking this in the evening when kava gold maybe is going to be more during the daytime. But again, we put the lobelia and the pulsatilla in here to work on that parasympathetic response, but to also relax us, to work on the peripheral nervous system. And then again, kind of help us go to sleep and stay asleep, especially if you need a little bit more of emotional support. And that's being expressed for you and not sleeping and anxiety and all of that. So I did want to leave some time for questions and answers at the end. Somebody said, what would you recommend for somebody who gets stomach pains when stressed? So that's a great question. I would say something like that's a bit more carminative in nature and relaxing. Chamomile can be really nice and gentle on the body because, again, we don't want necessarily something that's going to overstimulate the system. So I would say chamomile, lemon balm can be, nice. And even something like digestive bitters, a lot of people don't realize that those can be really nice. So anything that's going to be bitter in nature, like dandelion root, gentian. But if you're that person who's expressing stress, I would say probably a chamomile or a lemon balm could be really nice for that. Is it generally a good idea to take a targeted approach with supplements or go with a general one such as Anxieties? So again, I think that kind of depends on figuring out what kind of stress person you are and what's going on in your life. If you're normally like things are cool and copacetic and like you're fine and maybe you have a stressful couple of months coming up, you're buying a new house and you're moving and you're changing jobs and whatever, yeah, you can certainly kind of go into pre-season mode, as I would call it, where you sort of start to titrate up some things. Again, knowing how you respond to stress. So for example, for me, I get sick 1000% when my stress bucket is too full. So I might increase things like Eleuthero and maybe even some of my basics, like, like my vitamin D and some of my mushrooms like reishi and chaga, right? And then on an as-need basis, take some more of those heavy hitters. So something like the anxieties, or I'll take the kava for a while. So you can kind of it doesn't have to be a this or that approach. It can be an and this, right? So I'm taking my vitamin D and kava every day, and I'm taking my anxieties as needed. So you can do an and or approach, not necessarily a this or that approach. Hopefully that helps answer that question.
Okay, that was wonderful. That was a lot of information in under an hour. So I don't know which blend you took beforehand to keep things going and keep you on track, but it was great.
Thank you.
Brianna, I want to thank you so much. And to everyone here that's on, we will be posting this in the next day or two on our blog site, naturalcompounder.com/blog, because I know I'm going to look forward to watching it again and again, because each time something else floats up to the top. So thank you very much for your time and all that great information, and have a good night.
Thank you for having me. I hope you all stay healthy and well.
You too. Have a good night. Bye-bye.